The deep Pacific Ocean is the quietest and most consequential battlefield on Earth. It produces no smoke, no visible wreckage, no imagery that satellites can capture and analysts can study. Its engagements, if they can be called that, happen in darkness at pressures that would crush an unprotected human body in seconds, conducted by crews who may operate for months without surfacing, whose mission success is defined entirely by what they find and what they are not found doing. It is the domain of the submarine. And in the years since China's nuclear ballistic missile submarine force achieved what the Chinese Navy calls credible sea-based nuclear deterrence, the ability to hold targets on the American mainland at risk from submarines operating in the Pacific. The competition in this domain has become the most strategically significant naval contest of the era. The arithmetic of nuclear deterrence is built on certainty of survivability. For a submarine-based nuclear deterrent to function as deterrence rather than merely as capability, the adversary must not know where the submarines are, must not be able to track them with sufficient confidence to plan a disarming first strike, must not, in the most operationally specific terms, be able to put a fast attack submarine in a position to destroy the ballistic missile submarine before its missiles can be launched. The moment a nation believes it can track and trail an adversary's ballistic missile submarines with sufficient reliability to threaten them in a preemptive strike, the deterrent value of those submarines is compromised, not eliminated, but degraded. And in the mathematics of nuclear strategy, degraded deterrence is a dangerous condition that neither side can afford to leave unaddressed. China understood this arithmetic, and China had been investing in the solution to it, or rather, the counter to the American solution, with the systematic determination that characterizes its military development programs across every domain. The Type 094B Jin-class ballistic missile submarine had been China's primary sea-based deterrent for years, a capable platform limited by acoustic signatures that American and Allied passive sonar networks could detect at operationally significant ranges. The Type 096, estimated to be significantly quieter, to carry a longer-range JL-3 ballistic missile that extended its potential patrol areas deeper into the Pacific, and to incorporate propulsion improvements that the intelligence community had been assessing through collection programs for the better part of a decade, represented China's attempt to achieve the level of acoustic stealth that credible deterrence required. It was a Monday. The time was 11:32 local, though in the operational reality of submarine warfare, local time is an abstraction. At the depth the submarines were operating, there was no sun, no sky, no day or night. There was only the acoustic environment, the ship's systems, and the mission. A United States Navy Virginia-class nuclear-powered fast attack submarine was operating in the Western Pacific, approximately 600 nautical miles northeast of the Mariana Islands, conducting a classified mission that the Navy's operational security would not confirm or deny in any public channel. The nature of the mission was what Virginia-class submarines do when the intelligence picture indicates that a Chinese strategic asset is operating in waters where American national security interests require awareness of that asset's position. The intelligence picture had been building for 11 days. A Type 096 hull designation, not confirmed assessed by Signals Intelligence and Space-Based Collection as one of 2 units that had completed recent operational trials, had departed Longpo Submarine Base on Hainan Island 12 days earlier. Its initial track, assessed from SOSUS bottom array data and the collection of a P-8 Poseidon operating in the South China Sea, had placed it transiting the first island chain through waters south of Japan, running deep and quiet on a course consistent with a transit to a patrol area in the western or central Pacific. The transit track had been handed off between collection systems at multiple points, the SOSUS arrays, the P-8S, and ultimately the Virginia-class submarine that had been repositioned to an intercept position based on the projected track and the transit speed analysis. At 11:32, the Virginia's passive sonar operators had been listening for 6 hours from a position that the track analysis had indicated would place them ahead of the Type 096's estimated route. They were running at ultra-quiet, minimum machinery noise, reactor in reduced power mode, propulsion on the ultra-slow 7-blade propeller configuration that made the Virginia one of the quietest submarines in naval history. They were listening at the frequencies where the acoustic modeling indicated the Type 096's signature would be most detectable. The first indication was not a tonal. It was a broadband contact, a slight elevation in the ambient noise level at specific bearings that was inconsistent with the marine environment and inconsistent with any known shipping traffic in the area. The sonar supervisor looked at the display for 4 minutes before he spoke to the officer of the deck. Possible contact. Bearing 273. Broadband elevation. Not biologics. Not shipping. I need more time. The officer of the deck did not reach for anything. He did not change the ship's speed or course. He looked at the sonar display and waited, because in this domain, patience was not a virtue. It was a weapon. The Virginia maintained her position and listened for another 22 minutes. In those 22 minutes, the broadband elevation clarified. A tonal emerged, faint, at a frequency that the sonar system's narrowband processor had been analyzing continuously since the contact appeared. The frequency was in the range that acoustic modelers had predicted for the Type 096's main propulsion turbine harmonics, based on the collection that had been done on the ship's pierside machinery tests at Longpo. The database had the prediction. The passive sonar was finding the match. At 11:54, the sonar supervisor made his assessment. Contact classification. Possible Type 096. Bearing 271. Confidence moderate. Suggest we maneuver for cross-bearing. The commanding officer had been in the control room since 11:47. He had listened to the sonar supervisor's running commentary on the contact development without interrupting, without asking questions that the sonar team could not yet answer, without doing anything that would disturb the focused professional work of the people who were making the contact available to him. Now, he made his first decision. All stop. Drift to 3 knots. Maintain bearing. Do not maneuver yet. All stop. The Virginia's propulsion went to minimum possible output, the submarine slowing to a drift that would take it perhaps 3 nautical miles over the next hour, while the passive sonar array continued to build its picture. Any propulsion noise the Virginia generated would contaminate the forward bearing where the contact was developing. The discipline of silence was absolute in this environment. Every decibel of self-noise was a decibel that could mask the signal being sought. At sea, distance is language. In the underwater domain, silence is the loudest statement a submarine can make. The drift continued for 31 minutes. In those 31 minutes, the contact's tonal strengthened, the frequency analysis refined. The bearing remained consistent at 271, and at 1225, the narrowband processor produced a classification update that the sonar supervisor reported in a voice that was, by the standards of submarine operations, energized. Contact classification upgraded to probable Type 096, tonal match at 68%, bearing 271, estimated range 12 to 20,000 yards. Recommend maneuver for fire control quality track. The commanding officer looked at the bearing line on the geographic display. 271 from the Virginia's current position placed the contact to the west-northwest on a course that was consistent with the transit track prediction and a speed estimate of approximately 5 knots. At 5 knots, the contact was running quiet, not at its maximum sustained speed, which would be louder, but at the slow creep pace that submarines use when they are attempting acoustic stealth. The Virginia was quieter. The evidence for that assessment was not theoretical. It was the fact that the Virginia was tracking the Type 096, and there was no indication, no maneuver, no speed change, no acoustic behavior change that the Type 096 was tracking the Virginia. This was the fundamental asymmetry at work. The Virginia's acoustic signature, the product of decades of continuous submarine quieting programs and the specific engineering choices that the Newport News designers had made in the Virginia class, was below the detection threshold of the Type 096's passive sonar at the current range. The Type 096's signature, despite its improvement over the Type 094B, was detectable to the Virginia's passive sonar at a range where the Virginia itself remained invisible. This gap, not large, not absolute, but operationally significant, was the product of 30 years of American submarine quieting investment and of the specific technological choices that each Navy had made in the trade-offs between speed, payload, endurance, and acoustic signature. The commanding officer made his second decision at 12:31. A slow ahead, 3 knots. Maneuver to close bearing, course 265. I want a cross bearing within the hour. Combat systems, start the fire control track. The fire control track initialization was not a weapons action. It was a data collection action. The Virginia's weapons system beginning to build the mathematical model of the contact's position, course, speed, and depth that a weapons employment would require. Building that model, even in a non-weapons context, was the most precise way to understand the contact's behavior and to accumulate the intelligence data that was the actual operational objective of the mission. The Virginia maneuvered slowly at 3 knots, working through the water on a course that placed the contact on a different relative bearing. The fundamental geometry of cross-bearing triangulation that has been submarine tactics since the First World War. At 13:04, the second bearing line from the new position crossed the first bearing line from the original position and produced a fix. The contact was at approximately 11,000 yards, course 220, speed 5.5 knots, depth estimated below 200 meters, 11,000 yards, 6 nautical miles. The Virginia was 6 nautical miles from a Chinese Type 096 nuclear ballistic missile submarine. The Type 096's crew did not know the Virginia was there. The Virginia's crew knew exactly where the Type 096 was. This geometry, this specific, precise, asymmetric geometry, is the operational expression of the American submarine force's strategic value, not the ability to launch weapons, though that ability existed and was present. The ability to be 6 miles from the most strategically significant naval asset in the Chinese arsenal, without the Chinese crew having any awareness of that proximity. The ability to maintain that proximity, to trail the contact, to build the track, to accumulate the intelligence, acoustic signature database, course and speed behavior, patrol area selection, communication patterns that would make the next contact with the next Type 096 in the next patrol cycle more assured and more complete. The trail continued. At 1417, the Type 096 made its first course change, altering from 220 to 250, a 30-degree left turn that, if maintained, would take it further northwest toward the deeper water of the Central Pacific. The Virginia tracked the turn, updated the fire control solution, and adjusted her own course to maintain the trailing position. The maneuver was executed at 3 knots, generating minimum noise, the sonar team tracking every development in the contact's acoustic signature as the turn produced the slight speed variation and bearing rate change that maneuvers produce. At 1543, a second course change, this one back to the right, 210. The Type 096 was altering its transit course in a way that was consistent with a counter-detection maneuver, the kind of random course changes that submariners are trained to execute to break any trail that might have developed without their awareness. The maneuver was standard doctrine. It was correct doctrine, and it did not break the trail because the Virginia's passive sonar capability gave it a detection range advantage that the Type 096's maneuver geometry could not overcome at the speeds involved. The trail continued through the second course change and through the third at 1708, and through a brief speed increase to 8 knots at 1833 that produced a stronger acoustic signature and, paradoxically, made the contact easier rather than harder to maintain. The Type 096's crew was executing their counter-detection protocol correctly and thoroughly. They were doing everything right by the standard of their training, and none of it was working because they did not know the threat was present at a range where their countermeasures could function effectively. This is the nature of acoustic asymmetry in submarine warfare. It is not a guarantee. The Type 096 was a capable, quiet submarine by any standard that is not specifically the Virginia class. Against most of the world's fast attack submarines, its acoustic signature management would have been adequate. The gap between it and the Virginia was real, but not enormous. And that gap was the product of choices. Funding choices, engineering choices, program continuity choices, made over 3 decades by 2 navies that both understood the strategic stakes. At 2115, the Virginia's commanding officer made the decision that the intelligence assessment and the mission parameters required The trail had been maintained for 9 hours and 43 minutes. The contact's acoustic profile had been fully characterized across multiple speeds, courses, and depths. The patrol area selection behavior had been documented. The Type 096's JL-3 missile launch datum area, the geographic box within which the submarine was positioning itself to maintain the ability to strike targets in the central United States, had been assessed and would be transmitted to Pacific Fleet and Strategic Command in the mission report. The mission was complete. The Virginia transmitted a compressed data burst through the extremely low-frequency communication system at 2122. A brief, encrypted uplink that contained the contact's position, course, speed, depth, and the 9-hour acoustic track data. The transmission was short enough that its detection by the Type 096's ESM systems would be unlikely, and the Virginia's course and position were already changing by the time the transmission completed. The commanding officer looked at the sonar display one final time before initiating the separation maneuver. The contact track was still there, the Type 096 continuing its course southwest, unaware of the 9 hours of proximity that had just concluded. The separation geometry would take the Virginia northeast, opening the range at a rate that would put 10 miles between the two submarines within 40 minutes, then 20. Then the ocean's acoustic complexity would make reacquisition from either side a different problem. All ahead 1/3, course 045. The Virginia turned northeast and began to pull away. In the sonar room, the contact's tonal faded, not abruptly, but gradually, over the next 47 minutes, as the range opened and the Pacific's acoustic environment reclaimed the frequency band that the Type 096's machinery had been occupying. At 2209, the contact was below the detection threshold of the Virginia's passive sonar at the current range. The trail was over. The mission was documented. What had occurred over 9 hours and 43 minutes in the Western Pacific was invisible to every sensor that was not a submarine with passive sonar capability. No satellite had seen it. No surface ship had been involved. No aircraft had been overhead. The ocean's surface had been indistinguishable from any other patch of deep Pacific water, flat and empty, and giving nothing away about what was happening 600 meters beneath it. But in the classified databases at Pacific Fleet, at STRATCOM, at the Navy's submarine warfare centers, a 9-hour acoustic track of China's newest and most capable nuclear ballistic missile submarine now existed. It contained the Type 096's acoustic fingerprint at every speed it had operated, on every course it had maintained, at multiple depths. It contained the patrol area selection data that would allow analysts to refine the predicted operating areas for future deployments. And it contained the specific tonal characteristics that would make the next contact, whenever it occurred, wherever it occurred, faster to classify and more confident in its assessment. Modern submarine warfare is not won in single engagements. It is won in the patient accumulation of knowledge. The acoustic libraries that make classification possible, the trail data that makes patrol area prediction possible, the fundamental intelligence that allows the submarine force to know at any given moment where the adversary's strategic assets are. That knowledge is deterrence. It is the practical operational expression of the strategic principle that no ballistic missile submarine can be an effective deterrent if the adversary can track it. China's Type 096 was a more capable submarine than what had come before it. Quieter, longer ranged, more capable. And it had still been tracked for 9 hours and 43 minutes in the Central Pacific without its crew's awareness by a Virginia-class fast attack submarine that had found it, classified it, and trailed it, using the acoustic advantage that the American submarine force had spent 30 years building and that no amount of Chinese engineering advancement had yet eliminated. The Pacific is deep and dark and vast, but it is not a hiding place, not from the boats that know how to listen